Welcome back to the Remedial Film Class Podcast. I'm your host, Dan.
And I'm Travis.
I'm George.
And?
Oh, am I supposed to say something?
And that's Troy.
I mean, if you if you want to say your name,
He's a veteran. He's a veteran.
This is Troy.
Hey, Troy.
Hey, Troy.
Welcome back to the Remedial Film Class. Now, for our regular listeners, you'll know that Troy Howarth is a man amongst men, a scholar amongst scholars, an author of books, and a speaker of commentaries.
An icon, if you will, of some sort.
Depends who you ask.
He's a resource, no less.
A resource, yes.
And if Troy's back in the house, there's a good chance we're talking about something Italian and something gory. And that might just be the case.
That's a safe assumption.
So we are in our spring outbreak, where we've been taking George on a journey from Night of the Living Dead up through The Walking Dead, which is the one thing he's ever watched in his life voluntarily.
No, I think even Travis drug me into that.
I drug him kicking.
So,
yes.
yeah.
He didn't scream, but he was kicking.
Yeah.
Well, until the show started. And then there was plenty of
Yes.
screaming.
A little bit.
One hopes. So today, we are getting off the Romero track, and we're looking at a movie that if it wasn't spawned by the success of Dawn of the Dead, it certainly cashed in on it. We're talking about Zombie 2, Zombie Flesh Eaters, or just plain old Zombie, directed by Lucio Fulci from 1979. Now, George, you have not seen a ton of Italian movies, but you've seen a few, mostly because of me.
Yeah, about a half a dozen at this point, yeah. Maybe a little more.
How are you feeling coming right out of your first viewing of Zombie?
The one word that I would describe this movie as is straightforward.
Okay.
There's no,
It doesn't pull any punches.
yeah, it's straightforward. There's not, any big twists. There's not, it's just, there's something going on. We don't know what it is. We're figuring it out.
And you're along for the journey.
People get eaten. More people get eaten. We escape. And,
More eating.
more people are going to get eaten. and it's hopeless. And that's it. Very straightforward. No twists or turns or, trying to, with Dawn of the Dead, there was that whole, after the world ended, basically, there was this, how are we going to survive? And then they survive for a while and they go through trials and tribulations. None of that. This was just very straightforward. Zombies are going to take over. Boom.
Yeah, it's kind of almost, again, I don't want to compare it to The Walking Dead, but it's almost like this movie is like Fear the Walking Dead, where it's days. The days of the outbreak. The days of the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
People coming to life and being considered murderers and rapists and whatever. They don't know that they're undead. They don't know that you're dead until you're bitten.
Right, kind of like in Night of the Living Dead, where there was just mass murders going on and no one knew what was going on.
And Dawn of the Dead was more like, okay, we're in this shit. It's been going on for a while. Kind of not a long time.
Yeah,
but
how are we
going to
survive this, and what are the challenges of post-zombie apocalypse?
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, Zombie/Zombie 2 is more like the March of 2020, whereas Dawn is the November of 2020.
November, yeah. Yeah, people are throwing pies and going shopping.
Or April of 21. I mean, who knows?
Hey, sky's the limit on this one. We'll know by then. This doesn't come out till May.
That's true.
So, Troy, what's your relationship like with this movie? I know you're a Fulci expert of sorts, but where does this movie fit in your understanding of the Fulci canon?
Well, it wasn't the first one I saw. It was certainly one of the first ones I saw back in the old VHS days in the 80s, when I was, frankly, much too young to see it, but I saw it anyway. And, back at that time, of course, you were seeing things panned and scanned and in really grubby quality, and it was kind of difficult to get a feel for what a well-made movie it was. But it certainly delivered the goods. Eye-opening, I guess, is a word you could apply to it.
Or eye-stabbing.
Yeah, eye-opening. Yep.
eye gouging action, which is kind of a theme in Fulci. There's a lot of eye gouging, a lot of ocular violence in his movies for sure. That's sort of inspired the title of my book, Splintered Visions, which is all about Fulci and his films, obviously. I don't think it's his best film. I think it's a very good film. It was very much a gun-for-hire movie. It wasn't something that he initiated or originated. He wasn't even originally supposed to direct it, but obviously very glad that he did, because he made it into something pretty wonderful, because it was really the first horror movie that he made, the first real horror film that he made, and he really went for it with gusto, obviously didn't hold back. And I think that's one of the things about Fulci in general, is he's the director who, when everybody else is going to cut away, he's going to go in for a close-up. And I think this is a very good example of that. Obviously, the most famous scene in the movie is a great example of that, because you know, you don't expect it to necessarily go on and on the way that it does. And it's I think it's something that holds up tremendously well, even into the 21st century. So if not in the absolute real top tier of his films, it's pretty high up there for me. It's a movie I'm very fond of.
Now, you mentioned panning and scanning. And I knew what you meant, and Travis knew what you meant, but George had no idea what that means. Do you want to go into a little bit of film history and help George kind of visualize what you're talking about?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that's something I take for granted because, of course, you know, as a child of the 80s, it was something we grew up with, and obviously, fortunately, nowadays it's kind of gone. What used to happen was, with films that were shot in widescreen, TV sets back in those days were all formatted to a particular aspect ratio, where widescreen movies like this, 235 films, which are in the widescreen aspect ratio, were basically cut in half. To sort of fit them onto the screen, they had to be kind of literally almost cut in half. And panning and scanning was basically a technique where they would sort of pan on a telecine when they were doing a transfer. If somebody was talking at the left side of the frame, they would focus on that person. If somebody at the right side of the frame was talking, they would usually pan over, so hence pan and scan. It's something that was really, really distracting on widescreen films, and that's why it was difficult seeing Fulci's films that way, Sergio Leone's films, John Carpenter's films. Seeing something like Halloween, for example, pan and scanned, it was really ruinous. It really destroyed the compositions and so forth. So fortunately today, with widescreen TVs and all that, we don't have to worry about that anymore, but that was kind of the standard back in the 80s into the 90s.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that.
Yes.
Well, it ruined the movies.
You definitely got used to it. It did ruin movies.
It ruined movies, and Scorsese basically said it was like the movies were being redirected, which in a sense was true, because some lab technician was basically deciding what was important to show and what wasn't.
Yeah.
And Fulci was very, very good with widescreen in particular, but he also liked really tight close-ups. And so the first Fulci movie I ever saw was a movie he did called The Black Cat, and there's a lot of close-ups of people's eyes in that movie. And sometimes if they had a shot where they couldn't figure out what to do with it, very often if they didn't do panning and scanning, they would just crop it, just out and out crop it. And so The Black Cat, there were just a lot of shots of people's bridges of their noses in that film. That's all that was left, which obviously didn't make for the most engaging viewing experience.
No.
But it did make for an excellent storyline on Seinfeld, where Jerry finds a bootlegger that he really likes, because he sits in the theater with a handycam, and he feels like his job of like picking what part to scan and which part to pan like improves the direction of some of these movies.
Yeah, he becomes an artist about it.
I love this guy.
Now, you mentioned that this wasn't originally a Fulci flick. Now, from what I understand, it was originally going to be Enzo Castellari. Is that correct?
Yeah, Enzo Castellari, who, for those who don't know, is more of an action film director. He's one of Tarantino's favorites. And in fact, Castellari in 1978 made a film called Inglourious Bastards, spelled differently, but has very little to do with the movie that Tarantino made. But Tarantino's a huge fan of his and has, really praised his movies to the skies. Castellari had never directed a horror film, and he was not particularly comfortable with the idea of doing this film. It was written, commissioned, based off the success of Dawn of the Dead in Italy. It came out in Italy before it came out in America. As a matter of fact, came out under the title of Zombi. And so this movie was commissioned and kind of rushed into production, and Castellari didn't really particularly want to do it, but he said, you know what, I think Lucio Fulci would be good for this. And Fulci was kind of in a little bit of a career slump at that time. He'd made a film called The Psychic, or Seven Notes in Black, which was a giallo, which was kind of an expensive film, and it didn't do well at the box office. So his career wasn't in the greatest of shape at that time. So he suggested Fulci. Fulci was available, and the success of this film made him into, the main competitor to Dario Argento in Italy as far as horror and suspense movies were concerned.
Now, when I was first discovering the Fulci catalog, it started with Zombi. And I've told this story on the show before. I was at Best Buy. I see this badass cover. I've already seen Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead, so it's like it's a gimme that I'm going to pick up this movie, and it's probably going to be great. And I'd never seen the dubbing before, so that was a kind of a jarring thing. But when we got to what my buddy and I call the scene, right? The splintered vision scene. I mean, his jaw drops, my jaw drops. We're in high school. We've seen some stuff, but we've never seen anything like that before. And so my impression of Fulci is this, gore hound. In my original, desperate search for DVDs and bootlegs, because there wasn't a lot of stuff out there on quality DVD at the time. All I found was the later Fulci, the gory stuff, and so I thought I had that guy totally pegged down. I thought, okay, Fulci equals gore, great. But it wasn't until this Blu-ray cycle, when his older movies come out, his giallo, that I come to realize that he's actually maybe as good as Dario Argento at the giallo. But it just took me until I could get outside the thought of gorehound guy and look at his films on the whole. Heck of a director, guys.
Yeah, he started in, his career goes all the way back to the 50s. And he started off as a screenwriter and assistant director, and that's what he did for a number of years. Made his film directing debut in 1959 with a comedy, and actually his early films were all comedies. He made a few musicals. Fulci actually was also a lyricist. He wrote lyrics to a couple of very popular, sort of top 10 chart hitting songs in Italy in the 1960s. So, I mean, he was a man of many talents. It wasn't until like the mid-60s that he started making films that started to display kind of a fascination with violence and sadism, and gradually from there the movies started to get darker and darker, and I'm sure there are a variety of reasons for that, but it wasn't until Zombi in 79, 80, when it really took off and became a big hit, that, again, he kind of became known as the Italian gore director, I guess. Some people call him the Godfather of gore, which is a misnomer because that's really Herschel Gordon Lewis. But he definitely was known as kind of the splatter king, whereas Dario Argento at that time, yeah, his movies were violent, and yeah, they sometimes had, really gory highlights to them, but his movies were a little bit, dare I say, classier, a little bit more upmarket, whereas Fulci's were, a little bit, whereas Fulci's were more kind of down and gritty and kind of, he didn't try to pretty it up. In other words, if he was making a horror film, that's what he made. He went for broke and didn't hold back. He could do more subtle things. He could go for atmosphere. But that was the thing that people really embraced, the fans really embraced, was just his willingness to go for broke with the gore sequences.
So Fulci was kind of like a Tobe Hooper kind of, just
a little
down
bit.
And dirty.
A little bit of that kind of hysteria approach that Hooper had, but he had a really good run for several years. He churned out a lot of films in fairly rapid succession, really, really high quality. But unfortunately, his health started to decline, and later films, between his failing health and the lower budgets and so forth, they don't always show him at his best. But the average kind of gore hound really reveres him for that period of like 1979 to 1982 or so, where he was really cranking out one after the other of these movies. But again, I think if you want to get a better sense of what a really good craftsman he was and what a really fine filmmaker he could be, I think, you also need to look at the earlier films, because there's some really great stuff there.
I have a question. I figured this would be a good place to ask. When I was watching the beginning of the movie, it felt to me that a lot of those shots were probably done illegally? did they get the film rights or the permits or whatever to film in the harbor?
Hell no.
Okay. Yeah. I'm watching it. I'm like, man, this is like...
There were a lot of problems with that because Ian McCulloch, the Scottish actor who plays the lead in the film, the journalist,
right.
was not aware when he went over to do the film that they didn't have permits. And when he showed up in America, in New York, they asked him what he was there for, and he said he was there to make a movie for Variety Film. And they looked and they said, "There's no record of anything being made over here." And then he realized, and he said, "Oh no, I mean, I'm stopping here before I go out to Los Angeles." They're like, "No." So there's a little bit of trouble there. But he also told a great story about when they were filming in the newspaper office. It was a real, apparently a newspaper that was owned by Rupert Murdoch. And I'm sure you're aware of who he is.
Yes.
And at one point, they were filming a scene, and all of a sudden, Rupert Murdoch showed up and pretty much said, "Who the fuck are all you people? Get the fuck out of here." That was
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, there was no permits were secured. Apparently, everything was kind of shooting very quickly and getting in and out, until they were able to move out of the American leg of their journey. Obviously, when they went to the island location, that was no longer a concern. It was the same production company. They also rushed another movie into production afterwards called Zombie Holocaust, not directed by Fulci, but it also starred Ian McCulloch, and that was made even quicker, and it's not nearly as good a film, but it was released over here with the immortal title of Dr. Butcher, M.D., Medical Deviant.
Nice.
And it does
sounds like
have
something Dan's going to make us watch.
I considered making you watch that as part of this cycle, but I'm going to spare you. It does contain maybe the third coolest kill in a zombie movie, though, where Ian McCulloch picks up a running motorboat motor and goes straight into the skull of a zombie.
Nice.
It's amazing. Other than that, you don't have to watch the movie, but I'll send you that scene because it's pretty fantastic.
Well, a little bit of trivia there, just to connect in with Enzo Castellari, who was offered Zombie and turned it down. His father directed that film. So there you go. I think that was one of the last films that he directed. So he had been around for quite a long time making movies. Obviously, he was quite the veteran by that point. But I don't think that's the movie he wanted to be remembered for.
That seems to be kind of the thing in Italian genre cinema is you can't judge a person based on their last film.
Well, it's probably true in general. Very few directors, are fortunate enough to be able to go out on a high note. There are exceptions. Obviously, there are some directors who continue to do great movies into their old age, but quite a few of them seem to hit a bad patch later on. And yeah, I mean, then again, how many people make a movie thinking it's going to be their last movie? Very few. I guess John Cassavetes was one of the very few ones who kind of knew that was going to be it. But most people think there's going to be another one. So, yeah, probably not the best way for anybody.
And I'll put the late Mario Bava stuff up against a lot of his early stuff. I like his, even Shock, which is, it's not. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a post-Deep Red movie, right? It's kind of just Deep Red again, but it's executed. It's got good creepy bits. It's got a really good scare. I'd watch it anytime.
Yeah, no, he never really had that decline. Part of the thing with him, I think, that made him special, though, was he was kind of his own filmmaking crew. I mean, he did so much of it by himself. He did his own lighting. He could do his own camera work. He could do editing and special effects and so forth. So he wasn't as dependent on the input of other people as some directors are, where obviously you're very reliant on the abilities of your crew. And certainly with Fulci, when you get to some of those later films, he just didn't have the great collaborators anymore, and the results definitely suffered.
You definitely want the Halloween 1 Donald Pleasance, not the Halloween 6 Donald Pleasance.
Yes. I mean, bless him. He was still trying, but fatigue was setting in. He was not well, and it showed. So yeah, these things happen. It's just the nature of being a human being, I guess.
Yep, getting old.
I do really want George to watch Devil's Honey at some point.
Oh, I like that one.
Mostly so I can talk about the Devil's Honey for an hour, because I think there's a lot going on there that hasn't been tapped. by
saxophone stuff. Yeah, in particular, some saxophone stuff.
I mean,
yeah.
you start
Anything
off
like
strong with
trombones?
the sax, but oh, you have no idea, Travis. No idea. It's much better than the trombone kill.
Better than the trombone kill.
Better
Okay.
than the trombone kill.
Nice.
But I think it's got a subtext in it that needs to be mined. So at some point, I'm going to make you watch a really trashy movie, and we're going to talk about it. It's going to be fun.
Okay.
I love how like all these kills, like we can just say, the trombone kill, and like all of us know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. Some of the listeners are like, what the hell are they talking about?
Some of the
and they go back and they listen, and then we get more.
Right. No, but
more
like, there's just certain kills in like in certain movies that just like stick with you, and you know, it's just like there it is.
Like the backwards luge.
Yeah. Reverse luge.
Reverse luge.
Oh man.
So before we go any further, for our listeners' sake, this movie is available to stream all over the internet. I highly recommend just buying it blind. Just buy the 4K. You'll love it. And if you don't, try again, because you're going to love it by the second viewing. George, Travis, can you back me up on that? Having just watched it for the first time?
Yeah, and I would also, I want to watch it again with the commentary, because I think I heard somebody does a commentary for this movie, so I want to
it's no good.
check that out. Oh, it's no good? Okay.
Yeah,
I won't check it out then.
Terrible.
It starts off pretty strong. I like the opening. But
Just lack the staying power.
now that we've set the stage, I want to get into the plot of the movie, and I know a lot of our listeners aren't as hip on their Italian zombie movies as they should be. So if you want to pause it here, feel free. Go watch the movie on Prime. Come on back. If you want to spoil it, it's a zombie movie. We're not talking about Deep Red here. You'll still love the movie, even if we tell you every intricate detail, because this movie has to be experienced, not just talked about. But
It's definitely an experience.
we are going to get spoilery here, so if you don't want spoilers for a straightforward zombie movie, by golly, come back around after you watch it.
I don't feel like there's any spoiler to be had.
No.
Like it's
No.
a zombie movie.
Even when
man.
someone is killed, it takes a while for them to get killed, so you know it's happening. You know it's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. You know exactly what's about to happen when you're
Well,
watching this movie.
And that's
Good
one thing
stuff.
about the movie as a Castellari production, right? As a movie designed for Enzo Castellari's style, where he is much more an action-adventure kind of guy. This is Die Hard. This isn't Night of the Living Dead in a lot of ways. And so by adding Fulci in, you add the gore factor, the unflinching eye of the Fulci camera. And I think you probably add some like soft touch for the story elements that you wouldn't get in a Castellari flick. But story-wise, you're right. Not a lot to spoil. Zombies happen, stuff gets real, and then the gore is like super excessive.
There could have been a lot to spoil. I was hoping they would dig more into the backstory, because I was like, maybe with backstory. But it was straightforward, and it was everything I expected and more. But there's a lot of cool stuff that I would really wish. Obviously, the time period wouldn't allow it, but today they would have really dug into what was happening on that island. Is it voodoo? Is it experimental? Is it, what is it? Is it a virus? Is it all these things? The mystery is there, and it's stuff that would have been really cool to dig into, especially that doctor was interesting. Her father, I would have liked to learn more about her father. Like, there were a lot of things in there that would have added.
Well, it kind of goes back to Night of the Living Dead in the sense that there was the same thing. They weren't interested in the how or the why. It's just that it's happening. Richard Johnson, who plays the Dr. Maynard, who's the kind of shady, mysterious doctor who's at work on the island. He's wonderful in the film. First and foremost, I think this is not a movie that's known for great acting, but he gives a great performance in it because he really, first of all, he rewrote his own dialogue, and so he came up with a lot of wonderful stuff, and he kind of gave it a little bit of real character, a little bit of real edge, and he ad-libbed a lot of wonderful stuff about everything that was going on in the island and so forth, and kind of tried to provide a little bit of shading and backstory, little hints at things that are there. And you can't really quite tell, is this guy on the level? Is there something a bit shady about him? Is he a good guy or not? It's all very ambiguous, which I think is one of the film's great strengths. this was a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company, a very, very distinguished actor, had been in some huge movies. He'd done a lot of, great projects down through the years. And then in the 70s, he found himself doing a lot of Italian genre films, and he was not at all snooty about it. I actually got to interview him not long before he died. He passed away in 2015, and he had no attitude whatsoever about these movies. He was very delighted and amused by the fact they were so popular. He didn't expect them to be. They were just a job. They were a paycheck, but he really enjoyed working with Fulci and told some great stories about Fulci's legendary temper. At one point, Fulci was getting really exasperated with the one actress in the film who really wasn't an actress. The one who is not the lead actor. Probably the brunette girl.
The girlfriend, yeah.
Yeah.
The girlfriend of the bearded guy.
Yes. She was not an actress. She had been hired, as he put it, for other things. And as you could see in the film, this is why she was hired. And
Yes.
Fulci did not do well with people who didn't know their jobs. He loved Richard Johnson because Johnson knew what he was doing and never caused any problems. This girl would flub takes and so forth, and apparently at one point he dropped down on the ground and started literally tearing into the grass with his teeth.
Ugh.
And Johnson's just standing there watching him, and he looked up at him and said, "If I don't eat the grass, I'm going to eat her."
See, Dan? That's the way I feel when I see it. So me and him have something in common. That's funny. So maybe that zombie did bite her for real then.
He was not happy with her. But
she looked good in a bathing suit, so.
Well, that's
Yeah.
why she was hired, and
Right.
that's the nature of it. But Johnson, of anybody in the cast, he really gives a really, really strong performance. I was really super impressed with what he did in that, because it would have been the easiest thing in the world for an actor like that to just come in and say, "This is just a piece of shit. I don't care. I'm going to walk through it." And he doesn't. He really commits himself to it and gives a little bit of shading to a character in a movie that's really not noted for its character, its atmosphere, its shock value, it's a certain amount of suspense, and certainly just again the willingness to go for broke, and all the wonderful kind of decay and just the sickly quality, to the atmosphere and so forth, but not much in the way of characterization.
I could see him sticking out. That was one of the things I put in my notes, was how he was doing the work. An actor would say, doing the work or doing the homework, whatever. You could tell he was adding a lot to whatever was written on the page. And as you said, he was, because he was writing it. So
Believe
that's
it or
good.
not, I felt the same way.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm not even kidding. I was like, yeah, that doctor. He's like, I don't know what's going on there. Like, he was keeping me on,
I kept comparing him to, I don't want to keep bringing up Walking Dead, but this helps George kind of understand. There's a character, Dr. Jenner, who runs the CDC.
Yeah.
And they meet with him at some point in the very beginning. And he has that same kind of mystery to him.
Yeah.
Where the more you dig, the more you're around him, the more you let him talk, the more you realize.
You're like, is this a good guy or
Yeah,
a bad?
he's
Like, what is this
complex.
guy's deal? Like,
So that's what I was hoping with this character. I was getting a little bit of that. But then I kept telling myself,
You
it's
got some of that.
1979. They're not going to do
You
that.
got
They just
some
want
of
to show
that.
you zombies.
yeah.
But I know if they made that movie today, somebody would really give him a lot of meat to play with.
Yeah. Now, I didn't watch it and say, oh, wow, his performance, his acting performance was, impeccable. No, I was just, I had that feeling,
He was
which is
above
what
the
what
others.
he was
Right.
trying to, what he was
Definitely.
trying to do was make me feel weird about him,
Mhm.
kind of. And I'm like, I can't wrap my head around this guy when I was watching. So he did a good job, I guess, because he got me.
Yeah, he definitely, I think he really, and this is an actor who, with his background and everything else, obviously he had a lot more experience than a number of the other actors. The lead actress is Mia Farrow's sister, which is probably somewhat obvious. She's not the more talented of the sisters, although she's okay.
She's the
She's
fourth
okay.
Baldwin.
Yeah, she's kind of a blank, but she's okay. Ian McCulloch is okay, he does what he can, but Johnson's the one who really, you can tell he's really doing his best to sort of bring something to it, and I give him a lot of credit for that. I think it's a wonderful performance, again, within the confines of what is, what they used to call a guest star part. That's when you had somebody who was a semi-name, who is in for a movie on a couple of weeks, playing a flashy part, but he's not in the whole movie. He really elevates it, I think. And perhaps in the process kind of shows up how inadequate some of the other people are by
Right.
comparison. But
Oops.
you know,
Well, he
that's-
actually was. He was given more to play with too, like set wise. Like I wrote down how realistic the hospital
Mhm.
felt. Like it
Yeah.
had that Ebola outbreak kind of feel in the Congo. Like it was just
Yeah.
You felt like you were gonna get something.
Yeah, last time I was at the Ebola hospital, that's exactly what it looked like.
Exactly. Well, we've seen it in the news a couple,
Yeah, no, I'm
couple
just
years
kidding. I'm
ago.
just messing
But
with
it's
you.
like when you see an outbreak movie that captures that, you feel like you could get sick just watching this.
Oh, I totally
Yeah.
feel like I've seen that
Yeah.
hospital on Frontline. Like,
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think some of that was back to Fulci's background because Fulci actually started out to be a doctor. He had been studying to be to be a doctor. He was in medical school, and the story he always told about how he ended up making movies was that he was a med student. He was going out with a girl that he liked very much, and she ditched him because he didn't have enough money. And he thought, "Well, fine, I'll show you. I'm going to make all kinds of money." And he dropped out and went into film school. He got in, started working on movies, and he said that he was making a movie in the mid 50s at one point, and a fancy car pulled up, and out came that girl. So he went over towards her, sort of opened up his arms to give her a hug or something, and she just gave him some money and kept on walking. So he said this is how wonderful movies are. But he said, yeah, it was all because of a woman that he did that. So I think some of that scientific, and you can see that in some of the other movies that he did. There's a lot of kind of interest in things like autopsies and lab work and things like that. That I think probably came from his background, from his medical studies, somewhat.
I mean, yeah, it makes total sense. You go to med school, you vivisect 3 dogs and put them on. Maybe that doesn't actually follow, but makes for a hell of a visual.
There you go.
Since we have Troy here, the feel of the classic Nosferatu, was that purposely done in the very beginning? Like the
I think
whole
so.
plague
I think
arriving on the
so.
boat?
Yeah, with the
Okay.
boat and everything, the ship sort of, the way it comes into the frame like that. Fulci was a very film savvy person. He was a very cultured man, and I'm sure that he was well aware of that. He did say in interviews that what he was trying to do, he wasn't interested in copying George Romero at all. He didn't want to do anything like what Romero was doing. He was trying to recapture the flavor of old zombie
Right.
films, where you had voodoo and things like that. So things like I Walk with a Zombie and White Zombie, that was the sort of thing that he was really trying to evoke. And yeah, definitely Nosferatu is a movie he was aware of.
Yeah, I had that whole "here comes the plague on the boat" kind of feel. I was like, okay, it definitely wasn't a mystery what was going to happen. That's why the ending, I almost thought they showed that happening too easily. Like you knew that outbreak was going to happen in America because of that body that fell over the. They purposely, I guess, maybe purposely did that, but the ending would have been more of a shock, like you said, the twist, if they were on that boat thinking that there was hope, and then they find out. Like, I guess they're hoping you forgot about that.
They do have
but-
a moment of hope.
yeah, but
before
you know
that.
that body fell over and he wasn't shot in the head, so he's obviously going to find his way
Somewhere.
somewhere,
yeah.
whether he's caught in a fishing net. Plus, I think one of the cops ended up in an autopsy room.
Right.
So he wakes
the
up.
one
So you
cop
already
was,
know.
was waking up. Yeah, you kind of get that sense. I mean, I guess part of it too is just how savvy you are with this type of movie. And at that time, don't forget, Dawn of the Dead had come out and been very successful, but there really hadn't been a ton of this type of zombie movies made at that point. There have been so many of them made since then that I think maybe more people might catch on to that now, whereas at the time, possibly maybe not so much, because prior to Night of the Living Dead, zombies in movies had always been just sort of slaves, on
Right.
plantations, thinking like the Hammer movie Plague of the Zombies or White Zombie with Bela Lugosi. I mean, there had been Night of the Living Dead, and then there was the first, and I think the best of the Italian kind of cash-in movies was Living Dead at Manchester Morgue from around 74.
We almost
then he
watched that. Oh, I should have made
That's
him
a
watch
great
that.
one. That's a great one. But then Romero comes back and does Dawn of the Dead, and I think that's where the whole kind of zombie thing started to really, really take off, because up until that point, I don't think it was as common. So maybe to a certain extent, it's definitely telegraphing it, but maybe it's more obvious now than it would have been at that time. But, that depends how you look at it, I guess.
I did almost want to follow this movie with Burial Grounds,
Oh,
but I'm not going to. But I've told them I'm sending them a certain clip. Much like Zombie Holocaust,
sure.
they don't need
We're gonna get some clips.
They don't need the whole movie. There really isn't a lot to those. Unfortunately, this movie, I think, stands on its own. Good movie. If you hadn't seen Dawn of the Dead, you'd still love this movie. But a lot of the kind of rip-off cash-ins to follow don't really add a lot in the plot department going through the end of this cycle. This is one of the weaker cycles. One thing we haven't talked about on this show at all is a movie called Cannibal Holocaust. Have you guys ever heard of that?
I've seen some of that, yeah.
It's
Most
like
of it.
maybe the most controversial movie.
Yeah, disturbing.
Maybe. That's why you have a zombie holocaust, right? They're trying to cash in both on Cannibal Holocaust and also simultaneously zombie.
Yeah, it's all sort of part of the cannibal craze, I guess, in a way, which had kicked off a few years earlier. Umberto Lenzi made a movie called Man from Deep River, which was kind of an Italian version of A Man Called Horse, the Richard Harris movie that had been a big hit. So that's usually the thing with this. The cycle is kicked off usually by a particular movie. So in this case, Dawn of the Dead was the one that kind of got the ball rolling, and then you had all the other zombie movies. But yeah, there's usually some movie in particular that's, Dirty Harry comes out and it's a big hit, so all of a sudden there's all these Italian cop movies and things like that. But that's typical of the world over, really. But yeah, the zombie movie and the cannibal movie can kind of go together a little bit because of that whole element of, well, just eating people, I guess.
Can I say that I was kind of surprised that, after watching this movie, that this movie came out after Dawn of the Dead? Because I felt like Dawn of the Dead had like so much more. It was less straightforward, right? It had more like dynamics, like surviving. What people do after when they're trying to survive.
These people were not survivors.
No, yeah, there was more in Dawn of the Dead. There was more to the story. It was like a wider story than this, and then And then I kind of thought, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Were they making this simultaneously? And so they didn't. But I thought that there was much less to this movie than there was in Dawn.
I think Romero was more about building not a universe, but building something kind of like what they're doing, what Kirkman did with the comic book, which is like, the first couple pages are just about one guy. And then you introduce people and you see how big the story gets as the character moves into the story.
Right.
So it's like, it's the same thing with Romero. I think he probably had in his head, I'm going to do the Star Wars of zombies, where you're just going to make it epic.
Yeah, I thought this
was more intimate.
This felt more like the coattails of Night of the Living Dead. It didn't make sense to me that Dawn came out and then this came out.
Well, what happened?
Maybe
I thought Dawn went further,
right.
And even though Dawn's zombies didn't look nearly as good as these,
right?
Like there was a lot of hokey stuff in Dawn, where it's a lot better done here. But like, I don't know. I just thought, well, like with the story and like the twists and the challenges that they face in Dawn, this was like much simpler compared.
Yeah.
Well, there's a different dynamic of work here. For one thing, Romero was a more character-oriented filmmaker, and he was also more interested in sort of social satire. Dawn of the Dead is a very overtly political movie. Now, Fulci could make films that had political subtext to them, and some of them do, sometimes in surprising ways. He was very often very sympathetic to kind of outsider characters and so forth who suffer at the hands of the so-called normal people because they don't fit in. So that element is in a lot of his movies. It's not here, and the reason it's not here is because he didn't write this one. This was written by Dardano Sacchetti, who was one of the key Italian screenwriters for genre movies at that time. So Fulci, again, was a hired gun on this movie, whereas the subsequent movies that he did like this, he was involved in from the get-go. But what he wanted to do in the later films was strip away the story. He wanted to make movies that were like nightmares. So you get movies like City of the Living Dead and The Beyond, where there's really very little in the way of story. And those are films that will probably irritate some people because they don't really have much in the way of structure. And that's not sloppiness. That's actually very deliberate. He wants it to be very irrational, very dreamlike, and very much like a sort of a waking nightmare. So this is structured a little bit differently because it's kind of a mystery up to a point. It's kind of an adventure film up to a point, and then it turns into a horror movie. So you could see where it would have worked for somebody like Castellari as far as like the action stuff was concerned. But I don't think he would have really worked well with the kind of atmosphere stuff in the way that Fulci did. So,
Right.
but in terms of how the timeline worked, what happened was Romero had, after Night of the Living Dead, obviously many people had been trying to get him to do a sequel for years. He didn't want to do one. He was trying to break away from horror films, as a matter of fact, for a little while. And eventually, he made several movies in a row that were not successful. He was in kind of a bad place. And a friend of his was responsible for the Monroeville Mall. He owned the Monroeville Mall, which back in the 70s, that was a unique idea. It seems funny watching Dawn of the Dead now, and they're like, what the hell is that? I mean, it's obviously a mall, right? Everybody knows that. But that wasn't a common thing back in the 70s. That was a new thing. And, he told the story about how he went in there and he looked around and he saw all these different kinds of, shafts and different, levels and things like that. And he thought, boy, you could live in here. And that kind of gave him the idea of making a sequel. Right around that time, Dario Argento, who was a big fan of Night of the Living Dead, thought, my star's on the rise. I'm raking in the money now. Maybe I should start looking to produce movies in addition to directing. So he came up with the idea, let's do a sequel to Dawn of the Dead. And to Night of the Living Dead, I should say. He approached Romero. Romero was on board with the idea by that point, so they make this movie. Again, it comes out in Italy as Zombi, in a very different edit from the version we're used to in the United States, which was supervised by Argento. It's cut differently, it's scored differently, and it's a huge hit. And so this movie is effectively thrown together very, very quickly because they want to get another movie like this into theaters as quickly as possible. So, there's not a lot of depth to the story, but I think what's interesting in the film isn't so much, it's not really the story that's interesting, it's the way the story is treated in terms of the visuals, in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of, sort of layering in things that are, mysterious and kind of ambiguous and very suspenseful, but also then just really going for the jugular, as far as the gore and stuff is concerned. So,
Yeah.
no, it's not a movie that has a great kind of epic kind of scope or idea to it, but it definitely delivers where it's supposed to. So I think they're very different films, and that's why I always, when people say Zombie is a ripoff of Dawn of the Dead, I'm like, it's not really a ripoff.
Not really.
Not even close.
No.
There are some Italian films that are ripoffs. If you ever see a movie called Hell of the Living Dead or Zombie, or I can't remember what the alternate titles were, but Hell of the Living Dead was one of the titles. That movie's a ripoff, right down to the SWAT team, and they even repurposed the Goblin music from that film. So that's a very different kind of a thing.
They steal the score wholesale, which is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
it's shocking the first time you watch it because you're just like, oh, that's a suing, is what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a ripoff. This was not, and that was the thing that always annoyed Fulci because poor guy just couldn't catch a break. It was always, if he made a giallo movie, he's ripping off Argento. If he's making a horror movie, he's ripping off Romero, and he really wasn't. But he definitely was benefiting from the fact that they made movies that kind of set these trends. And he went out and made his own movies that really compared well on their own level. But Zombie's an interesting case because Fulci did write, or at least co-write most of his films, but this was one that he just simply had no hand in whatsoever.
I find that funny because I didn't get a single Romero feel from this movie.
I don't either.
Maybe
I
back
think
then it's possible, but
shooting him in the head, I guess, is about the only thing, and that was something that isn't really established in Night of the Living Dead because they're still kind of figuring it out. I guess that's kind of put into the unofficial rule book in Dawn of the Dead. That's about it. I mean, the cannibalism angle too. Yeah, Romero had created that for it. But that's really all. They're very, very different movies. Again, Fulci's is indeed a lot closer to one of those old-fashioned atmosphere-based voodoo horror stories. It's more like an EC Comics in a way, although Romero's stuff is also very comic bookish. But
the intimacy of this movie had I brought him up earlier, but it does have that Texas Chainsaw feel, where like the camera is like basically on the end of the nose of some of the actors. Like it's like. Yeah. Like that scene where the scene, I had that same feeling as the girl at the dinner table in Texas Chainsaw, where she wakes up and they're like all in her face and they're just doing the close-ups of her eyes and she's looking around and it's that same feel. I didn't have a Romero feel at all. No, so it's funny that you're saying that.
No, if you look at their movies, I mean, that's the easy thing that a lot of people do because they don't really want to dig too deeply. But if you look at the films and compare them, they're completely different. They have a very different flavor, and they're both wonderful in their own way. I love Dawn of the Dead, not as much as Night of the Living Dead or even Day of the Dead, which is actually, funnily enough, my favorite of the three. But Zombie is wonderful too. And again, Zombie, in terms of Fulci's own horror films, isn't really my favorite of his horror films, but it's a great intro to him, I think, on the level of just, being thrown into that universe where anything can happen. And again, I would have loved to have been in an audience in 1979, 1980, seeing that scene with an audience.
The squirming.
Yes.
That's funny.
Yeah, that scene didn't really hit me as hard. I think I might just be desensitized.
You are
It's
desensitized.
possible.
You need to stay off
definitely.
of whatever horrible websites you're on, George. You've seen too much death.
It didn't affect me like it would have affected me back then. Like if I saw it when I was younger, I've seen enough now where it didn't affect me, but for a cool factor, effects factor, and film wise,
that's what I was thinking.
In.
That's what I was thinking when I was watching it. Like, I know, Dan, that scene was, epic for you when you saw it because you were younger. But, when I saw it, all I was thinking was like, is that spike really going to go into that eye? Oh,
Yes,
there it
is.
goes. There it goes.
There
And I didn't even think I did kind of get like a little bit like, oh, is that going to happen really? And then it started happening. I was like, oh,
Well, you're
this
waiting
is
for the
good,
cutaway.
man.
You're waiting for the
Yeah,
cutaway,
and it didn't
just
happen.
doesn't
And I was like,
happen.
whoa, man.
And you weren't brought up on Faces of Death.
Yeah, but
I
like,
saw that on VHSs.
I don't know. I don't know. I think I've watched a lot of I don't know a lot of Walking Dead, a lot of different stuff, and so nothing really like kind of surprises me anymore. But it was
one
really
of the things that did ring like true to what you're used to, because that was something you would see on the show.
right. Yeah.
And I brought up how angry I was last week when I saw the zombies actually murdering people as opposed to just devouring through instinct. They were actually
Right.
picking up tools and deciding,
Well,
hey,
that
I'm
was-
going to
that
kill
was
this guy.
2 weeks ago, but yes.
Or 2 weeks ago. And with this, they were pulling her head towards that wood. But you're
Right.
never really sure if it's the accident of it pulling her head towards it to bite it,
I definitely
Or-
felt that.
or it was purposely pulling her head towards the wood. And that's open to interpretation. I'm totally better with that.
Yeah, I interpreted it as it was just an accidental of him trying to get
Right.
that girl through the door so he could eat
But
her.
it's effective.
And it's very effective. Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was cool, and I thought it was like, wow, they actually showed that. But I didn't think, when Dan talks about the scene, I didn't really even register that was the scene.
Right.
But
Yeah, I think
it makes
that's
sense now.
typical. I think that's typical. It happens with a lot of things. I mean, if you watch The Exorcist now versus when it came out in '73, I mean, people were literally fainting at that movie, which may seem
Yeah.
ridiculous now, but at that time that was something. Or, when people saw the alien coming through John Hurt's stomach in Alien in '79, same year as this, in fact, I mean, that was another thing that was just like, oh my God. But, so much has happened since then, and so many parodies have been done and everything else that, depending on how you're coming to it, it either works for you or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Effective.
It's cool. Like one of the reasons why we do this like podcast is just because, George watches it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Does it hold up? Because we've watched this movie for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or whatever.
Your frame of reference is a lot different
Yeah,
than ours,
and so
right?
my frame of reference, just, in 2021, me being 30 years old, just didn't hit me like it hit audiences in the 70s.
It's like when
But it
you know,
still
when
was
someone
great.
sees Jaws,
but-
they're like, meh.
yeah,
And you want
I
to
mean,
punch them.
I try to respect the movie, I try to respect it. I try
Right.
to understand where it's coming from, but like, yeah, it didn't really hit me, and maybe that's a commentary on some other things, lots of things. But yeah,
I personally, I was taken out of that scene a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because of I was so bothered at how cheap that door was. Like it literally was made of balsa wood. Like
yeah,
I think it broke through with his pinky. Like it wasn't like a Jack Nicholson with the axe through the door. It was just like I think the door crumbled in his hands as he was.
Well,
she was walking away.
It was like
Funny,
a
it's-
paneling.
Yeah, it was like paneling. It was like
It's a funny
slats.
thing. For as many times as I've seen that film, that idea has never occurred to me. So there you go.
yeah. I was just watching. I'm like, man, this is. I actually my note.
Is this the thin walls moment?
Yeah, it's a thing.
Well,
my note was trapped, intense scene, cheap door.
Hey, speaking of the Pasadena thin walls from Halloween, that's an old joke, Troy. You weren't here for that. I'm sorry. But
He threw us a curveball one night when we were talking about Halloween.
well, you're from Pennsylvania area, right?
That's
Troy?
right.
So you have insulation in your house because you have weather. But in Pasadena,
Yes.
they don't have weather. And if you notice next time you watch Halloween, any of those shots in the upstairs bedroom, those walls are impossibly thin compared to what you'd have to have anywhere where there's actually weather.
Well, that's the downside of it's supposed to be set in the Midwest, but it was actually shot in California. So there are
Super
little things
distracting.
that you
And
can.
created
But
just
again,
5 minutes away.
But
it just
back
doesn't.
to
You know what? It's just one of those things that doesn't bother me.
back to your door problems, Travis, and Zombie.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Myers has a pretty quick time getting through that closet door. I mean,
I
they're
know.
essentially the same material. So
Yeah, same door.
But it takes him 20 minutes to get through the kitchen door. Like it's funny. It's I guess you do it whatever is convenient.
Yeah.
Yes.
guys, a zombie fights a shark in this movie.
Yeah, that was my first note. Well, actually, no, my first note was a Nosferatu note, but then I wrote shark versus zombie. Awesome.
Dude, yes. And we were talking about
It's
performances.
a shame he just didn't have some shark repellent.
Yeah, right?
Oh
Some
my gosh.
Bat shark repellent.
He's had 13
Or,
years to
or the
prepare.
shark had
Come
zombie
on.
repellent. Never mind.
But yeah, 13 years to prepare. They did not have their shark repellent. Jeez. Maybe the spray only works out of the water.
They already had that figured out. I mean, 66 Batman already happened.
No, the shark needed zombie repellent. That's what it
I
was.
understand that, but why didn't that zombie have shark repellent?
He didn't
spray.
need it.
That's
He
the
was
he
gonna
thing.
knew
The
use
it.
spray doesn't work underwater, guys. It's only out of the water that it works.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. We needed that ladder scene.
the performance of the underwater zombie, though, I think an unheralded, awesome zombie. We talked about Flyboy
How
and
about the
Dawn.
performance of the shark?
Yeah,
Dude,
shark was kicked ass.
How'd they get that shark to do that?
I believe it was a heavily sedated shark, and
It was a union shark.
yeah. And if memory serves correctly, it was Ramon Bravo, I believe, was the guy who was responsible for the underwater material there, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, again, it's obvious they're thinking, okay, Jaws has been successful, Dawn of the Dead's been successful. Let's put them together, and it is, to the best of my knowledge, I can't pretend to have watched every single zombie movie ever made, but it's the only zombie versus shark scene I can think of.
Yes. And I wish the guy who played that zombie had become like the trainer zombie for the entire movie. Because his movements and his commitment were a million times better than the shuffle zombies.
The
was just
shuffle
like,
zombies.
I was flipping out. I'm like, you can walk past these guys. Like, they're not going to kill you. They're just not going to get you.
Especially the scene
In the foyer?
where they go to check on the doctor's wife.
Yes.
That
In the foyer.
yes, in the foyer.
Where I'm
Yes.
screaming, grab a spear. There's spears.
There's spears on
three
the wall.
spears. Grab an antler, grab something. And then he finally grabs the antlers.
Well, see,
Yeah, but the
that's
zombies are
that's-
shuffling.
That's the old. I remember a critic asked John Ford one time about Stagecoach. They said, "Why didn't the Indians just shoot the horses on the stagecoach?" And he said the movie would have been over in 5 minutes.
It's a fine reason.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that popped up in my head because, like George said earlier, none of these people are survivors.
No,
Not one instinct kicks in. None.
no.
Yeah.
And one of them is a boater. Like, he should have at least had some kind of survival skills, and he just
Well, out of
He's-
all of them, I think he had the most.
he had the
probably,
most.
But
It's funny, he let her bite him, and then now he's like, shoot her.
yeah,
Why didn't you just have that feeling just like a second earlier?
I understand, and I've seen this scene before where a
many
loved
times.
one of yours is a zombie now, and you can't bring yourself
Right.
to put him down, and so somebody else has to do it, or there's nobody else, so you have to do it,
Right.
and it's a very impactful scene.
Naughtier.
Not really much here. He just let her bite him.
That was where I was thinking exactly what you're thinking. Like that scene, it has become trope.
Yeah.
And back then it wasn't trope, and it's a shame because that could have been a really impactful moment.
Right.
But it wasn't. You were just like, you hated her, even though she wore a great bathing suit. But
yeah, you were like,
you're just like, meh.
The worst actor. And it's like, now she's a zombie. It's like, I got to deal with her again. No, it's fine. And then she kills my favorite character. What
the? She was like the Annie from Halloween.
Guys, let's be nice to Annie. She might be listening. Hey, Al Cliver, the guy that plays Beardy Bodie guy.
Again.
Oh, jeez. Al Cliver, the guy that plays the boater guy.
Yes.
I don't want to hear a single negative thing about his performance because he's my favorite in the movie.
No, he was good.
He's awesome.
He was good. He was good.
Yeah, he went on to do a bunch of Fulci movies. He was another guy I got to interview for the book. Oh boy, I mean, he was in The Beyond. He's in The Black Cats. He's in Demonia. He's in several more Fulci movies. He actually became pretty good friends with Fulci, although they had kind of a rocky start because Fulci did definitely have a temper. He was notorious for being not the easiest guy in the world to deal with. It just depended on a lot of different factors. And Cliver at that stage wasn't a terribly experienced actor, so there were a couple things that went wrong thanks to him that Fulci kind of turned his wrath on him. But they ended up becoming friendly, and even into later years when Fulci was not in such good health, they remained friendly.
When Cliver's in one of my favorite, like, unheralded, never talked about on the forums kind of Italian movie, an early Ruggero Deodato film called Waves of Lust.
Oh, Waves of Lust, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. With John Steiner, who these guys don't know yet because they haven't seen Tenebrae, but they will. And, I mean, that movie does things on levels you don't see in the Italian genre cinema too often. And
do they have a zombie fighting a shark?
No, it's got like,
because I've seen that.
It's got some really good. It's just got levels. It's got character development in a way you don't expect. It's got a real small cast, so they have a lot of room to move.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, it's so good. But really hard to find, and not really like nobody ever talks about it, but they should. But it doesn't have any zombies fighting sharks, so nobody talks about it.
No cannibalism.
Yes, no.
Not enough people talk about that because that was a surprise to me.
What?
The zombie shark fight. Like, I've been watching horror movies for a long time, not
yeah,
foreign
how is
films.
that not a famous
That's
scene?
never been talked about.
You'll hear it referenced now and then. There's probably a reference to it in Shaun of the Dead somewhere, just kind of on the side that you didn't notice.
I'll have to check that out.
Oh,
yeah.
Fulci fish. There is if you look in the phone book, there's a Fulci fish listing at one point in that movie. So
great.
it's in there, but it's
I can't rewatch that movie.
The problem is, like, 20 minutes later, some chick gets her eye gouged out in graphic detail, so everybody kind of moves past.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Well, the other thing to be said about the big scene too is that Italian movies. I don't know if it's still the case. It was the case certainly then. It was the case certainly into the 80s and 90s. Even short movies, they always had intermissions, which is kind of a funny thing to us because unless it's like a 3.5-hour epic like Ben-Hur or something like that, movies don't have intermissions over here, but the movies in Italy typically did. And the intermission break for Zombie is actually right after that particular sequence. So that gave them something good to talk about when they went outside to grab a cigarette or have an ice cream or whatever. So good timing.
Yeah, great time to have an ice cream. It's like,
I don't know why I feel compelled to have an olive on that ice cream, but go ahead.
There you go.
Olives are good for you.
Well, Troy, I think we've taken over the amount of time we agreed to, so we are going to let you get out of here, but we really have to thank you for coming by again. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be on. I hope I'm not too boring.
No. I've learned a lot.
nah, you're the man, dude.
Well, thank you. I
man.
appreciate it.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough, Troy. Every time you're on the show, 2 out of 2 times you're on the show, you've made both of these guys way more open-minded about the weird shit I just made them watch. So I can't thank you enough.
Well, anytime. Again, if another one comes up you want me back for, just let me know.
Hey, we will invite you back. You have a standing open invitation. Anytime you've got free time, I'm sure you've seen the movie we're talking about because the whole point is we're watching movies George ought to have seen. And this one's a bit more obscure, but I think he could agree that he ought to have seen this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we basically have decided we will give Troy the honorary doctorate, right? So, I mean, he can come and teach whenever he wants.
Yeah, and
Oh,
we
there you
won't
go.
Yeah.
we won't take it back until you're on the news. But we are going to take it
well.
back if you end up on the news.
Well, they're going to catch up with me eventually, so it's just a matter of time.
Oh man.
Don't pull a and I think we'll be good.
No, that I won't do, but, you never know about other things.
Ah, jeez. All right, Troy. Well, hey, man, thanks so much.
Anyway,
Dun,
Dan,
dun, dun,
you need to start watching
bum,
some,
bum,
dun,
bum.
some
That's your-
TWD.
I'm telling you, that's your SWAT corner music.
SWAT
Oh,
you need to
corner.
you need to lift the Goblin song from Dawn, and that's your SWAT music.
I don't know that that's a Goblin tune. That might be from the other guys.
Oh, okay.
Because, yeah, the Goblin tune is the one that's got all the cool percussion. You know?
The score of this movie's good.
Oh, man. The wah, 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 wah.
I like the first part of it more. Yeah, that part. But then the more upbeat kind of Casio song is
It
not
sounds like
bad
an
either.
NES song,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, it's good. I like it a lot. They actually do this one as a tour as well, like the Argento stuff. So you can go see Fabio Frizzi play the score live in front of the movie. And it'd be a chance to see it with an audience, which might be fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, but they all
Post-COVID.
know about the scene.
Oh, it's
Most
true.
of them have seen it. It's not a surprise unless you watch it with my wife, who's not expecting
Yeah,
that to happen.
It's only the scene if you like introduce it to like someone now.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I have to say, guys, after my buddy and I saw the scene for the first time and we both almost died from excitement about how awesomely gross it was, we made it a point to show it to all our friends. You know, anybody that came over, hey, just sit down for a minute. I gotta show you this movie. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. Shout out to Mara and Andressa because the two of them nearly died. Like physically, I'm pretty sure Mara was going to vomit on my couch.
Nice.
So shout out to her. Hope she's not vomiting right now thinking about it. But, I mean, it'd be kind of cool if she was because it made an impact. Heck of a scene, guys.
And it didn't stop there. Like, when they get to the house, I wrote down The Last Supper. Like, it was like that whole scene with the 4 or 5 of them are just sitting there munching. I was
Oh,
like,
man.
Damn. Like you said, gratuitous. It's the whole movie's gratuitous.
Well, and the throat
but it's
bite,
necessary.
the actress that nobody liked
Yeah.
personality-wise, I thought she was fine. But I have very low standards, it turns out, for actors. I've learned that
And
from
I have-
watching movies with you guys. But
yeah, I'm the
when she
opposite.
gets her throat bit out, my buddy Brian, you remember Aztec level beating Brian from GoldenEye? I talked about him before. He, as an adult man, turned green, and he's like a Friday the 13th fan. Like he's seen
Right.
some shit, but that throat rip, he did not enjoy his experience watching that lady bleed out of her neck. It's pretty gross.
I was a little. I was when I saw the tour zombie at the beginning. I was like, tour will be a reference to Plan 9 from Outer Space, which you wouldn't know. But the overweight bald zombie at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I was excited because he was way better looking than anything that was in Dawn.
Yeah.
But then I thought to myself, okay, it's just basically a guy covered in oatmeal. And I was like, oh, I hope they're not all like that. But then they all had their own thing going on.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Troy, but I forgot. The zombies that kill the woman that none of us liked, except for Dan. The conquistador zombies.
Yeah.
It was never explained. Like, I know he was burying bodies. The doctor was burying bodies in the back.
Mm-hmm.
These zombies were coming out of the sand
Mm-hmm.
from another area. Where did they come from? They're not supposed to be conquistador bodies, right?
Oh, they are. They are conquistador bodies.
Yeah, they would.
They wouldn't still have maggots and shit on them.
No, they wouldn't.
Dude,
They would be-
it's a
they would
movie
basically
where a
be
zombie
evil-
fights a shark. Like, don't read too far. into it.
Yeah. I mean, we're asking a lot here. You know what I thought? I thought, like, how are they getting a New York radio station on the boat in the Bahamas, or wherever in the world they are?
Probably were listening to Stern. I don't know.
But like, in the 70s, I'm like, but I'm like, it doesn't matter that they're getting the New York radio station in whatever island bay that they're in. It's a movie, so I just
Could they
kind of
have
let
been
it go.
traveling for a little bit before that?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah,
idea
they're
is that
maybe
they
they're
basically
closer.
fix
They
the
got
boat
close
and
enough.
get out. Did they ever actually fix the drive shaft though?
I don't know.
I don't know. I kind of maybe I got to watch it again, but I kind of just got the impression that they were just in the boat for not a long time at all, and they flipped on the radio.
Right.
But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I mean, I gave it a pass, but I did.
So did I.
I did sit there and go, okay, if these are supposed to be 300-year-old zombies, they would not have any flesh on them whatsoever.
Yeah, they would be bones,
They would
and
be-
most of the bones would be
dust.
mostly dust.
Yeah. So I kind of was hoping maybe there was something else. That
No, it's just
because they never established if they're voodoo or not. Is there a hex on the island? Are these recently dead people? I wasn't sure.
maybe.
I mean, they were still cool
conquistadors,
looking.
Don't disintegrate as fast.
They're like
because,
saints.
yeah, they're like incorrupt conquistadors. I don't know.
Interesting.
Now, did you catch the thing where the hospital is inside an old church?
Church.
Yes.
And so as they have their final Alamo moment, their Night of the Living Dead Alamo, it's within a church. They like seek shelter within a church.
Sanctuary.
Yeah, man. It's like
My
a very
final
Italian concept.
Remember
Like
the Alamo.
they're not even going to, there's no, I don't think that anybody set out and said, I'm going to add a subtext to this movie and it's going to be that Italians always run into the church. But I think just
You know
their
what?
default knee-jerk reaction is, hey, where do you go? We're going to be in the church hospital. That's kind of fun.
I think The Walking Dead might homage this a little bit with Gabriel's place.
That's possible. Well, I mean,
It looks like exactly the same.
I thought it's an island, so there's probably was at some point a what do you call those things? Where somebody goes to convert. A missionary. There was a
Okay, yeah,
missionary
yeah.
there at some point. So, and the church looked to be at least 200 years old. So I wasn't I wasn't shocked.
I was just thinking of like usually, I mean, not that I know anything about islands, but like I'm thinking this is kind of like a third world
Yeah.
kind of place, and like when they have a building, they use it for church, and they use it for school, and they use it for hospital
Well,
if necessary, and they
yeah,
use it for
I
whatever.
definitely got the sanctuary feel. Like I know they picked a church on purpose.
Yeah.
Which is the same on the show. They pick a church on purpose.
Yes.
So, yeah, that was cool. The one thing I did notice, I don't know if you noticed it, Dan, I'm sure you did, there was a lot of Halloween in this movie.
Go on.
I wrote, shower scene music jump scare was perfect. She's taking a shower, and then you get that the hand up on the glass.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah,
Very
it does have a John
very
Carpenter.
Halloweenish.
Okay, yeah.
And then I wrote POV, eerie music, Halloween meets Night of the Living Dead. Like it was almost like once they started coming out of the ground, or they were establishing that there were more than just one or two with the doctor, there were actually some walking on the island, and they were watching. They were lurking in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
It had a total Michael Myers feel. Like I was almost waiting for like that moment where the kid comes out of the school and walks right into Myers. Like I was just waiting for it. It totally had a Michael Myers feel.
Well, and don't forget the same kind of pliable, breakable door as the closet in Halloween. So yeah,
Yes.
I think it definitely, Halloween is in the back of the mind of the people making this movie. But after making that much money, how could it not be?
Yeah, right?
It's a heck of a movie, guys. Really kind of gross. I like it. And guys,
I do have to
we didn't talk enough about. We talked about the scene. The scene is great, guys. When you watch, listeners, when you watch the scene, you're gonna love it. But the thing that makes me sad about the scene is it occurs right after some of the best mirror work in an
Right.
Italian movie. Like it's kind of Euro trash like, skis because it's just a naked lady. But the way that he uses the camera and like multiple mirrors in a room, it's really like, it's fancy. Like this guy's doing the work of a cameraman and as a director, but he follows it with a scene that, makes you forget everything else you saw in the movie.
Right. And then he makes you forget the scene by giving you the slowest zombies in the movie.
Oh, but see that slow zombies aren't bad, man. You got to have a slow zombie because you have to be able to avoid them in an open space, but they have to be dangerous in an enclosed space.
Yeah.
And then you get the best Alamo we've seen yet, right? I mean, there's fire.
I wrote that. It was my last note. Remember the Alamo. Now, the zombies coming into the church, again, that's where slow zombies annoyed me because it was like I never felt, even though they were picking them off, I never felt danger from the horde. I felt danger from the people dying.
Yeah, so
part of their group.
So you can have. All right, so this is how zombies are dangerous. They're either fast,
right?
Okay, or they're slow, and there's a ton of them.
Right. Or they're fast, and there's a ton of them.
Well, then you're
That's
fucked.
coming.
But yeah, but that's basically the MO, right? They're either fast zombies or they're slow zombies, and there's a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
This is how this works.
Yeah, but like I said, that horde would have been scary. The horde, I felt the danger of them walking in, but they were so slow, and they were almost like they were like not even shuffling. They were walking like their legs were tied together, and it took forever for them to even get to the group.
It's almost like if you just kind of ran through them with some purpose, you would just go past them.
Yeah,
is how it
but
felt.
I did feel the danger because there were people that were with them that were dead. So I knew that they were turning and there was danger.
And now they're surrounded.
Yeah. But I just wasn't feeling the danger from the zombies. Not like I felt when I watched Dawn, where I didn't feel any danger whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, I was just kind of disappointed that the horde wasn't as dangerous as one zombie in the back of the room.
They're still figuring it out.
Still figuring it out.
And it all comes together in the greatest television show ever made.
Yes.
The Walking Dead.
Now, Dan, when did Salem's Lot come out?
79. Same year.
79? Okay. Because there was a zombie that looked just like Barlow. And I was just like, oh, I wonder if they're making reference to that vampire. He was a very, very thin, pointy-nosed, pointy-eared, bald.
I'm thinking that's shared heritage with Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, okay.
Who's got the same face.
Which is what Barlow basically is the same design. So,
but the old 20s Nosferatu, which is a wonderful film if you can stand silent film.
Yeah, George, I have that. If you can watch that, you can probably get it on. I don't think it has any rights. You can probably get it online. It's only like not even 40 minutes.
62. Minutes? Some real short amount. Yeah, it's good.
It's a silent film,
so
but
good.
it's the retelling of Bram Stoker's Dracula, completely stealing every bit of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but a lot cooler.
I've never watched a silent movie ever.
Ooh,
so that'd be cool.
That might be where to start. That or Dr. Caligari.
The only reason I even watched it was the Queen David Bowie Under Pressure video when I was a kid.
I think you mean the Ice Ice Baby video.
That was before that.
When you were a teenager?
Like 1983-ish, I guess, was when that video came out. And in the video, they show a scene they show his shadow going up the steps. And it's like just creepy. I was like, what is that? So I looked it up and I wound up watching it. So you should see it.
But before you watch that, George, I think we probably ought to tell you what you're watching on the next episode.
Yes, please.
Dun, 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 dun. So, George, I don't know if you were aware, but first, there was Night of the Living Dead. And then there was Dawn of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, the darkest day of horror the world has ever known, George Romero's Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead.
All right.
And we're not going to tell you anything about it, but we can't wait to watch it with you.
We have to complete the trilogy.
I can't wait to watch it.
Thank you for joining us on the Remedial Film Class podcast. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Remedial Film Pod. You can find us at facebook.com/Remedial Film Pod. And now you can find old episodes on YouTube. So wherever you look, we're there remedially. We'll see you back here very soon for Day of the Dead.
I'm looking at this guy on this TV screen, and I didn't mention it because I didn't want to offend Troy with my stupidness. But the assistant to the autopsy, the black guy.
Yeah.
Totally over-prepared for this movie. He was on
putting
another
in work,
level.
man.
Yeah, he was doing shit that nobody else in the movie's like, yeah, we're not doing.
I have a feeling what happens is they go to New York illegally. They hit up, the New York acting scene, and they get a couple of guys. And then
We thought they were really making a movie.
the cops, we should have talked about this, but the cops, the reason the uniforms are so good is because they just used off-duty cops. They had them come in
Right.
uniform just to be in a movie. So the cops aren't really very good actors. But then you get the autopsy guy who is like a legit actor in a desert of bad actors.
Yeah, they definitely stick out.
So guys, you got to check out this scene from Zombie Holocaust. We were talking about it earlier. Go ahead and just hit that link. It's on YouTube. Skip to about 58:20, 58:25, somewhere in there. You're going to see a real goofy looking clayface zombie.
I went to 57:12. Is that okay?
If you want to spend a minute watching it, you go for it, bro.
No. 58.
Yeah, save yourself a minute of life.
Travis, do you know that if you double tap on like the right side of the screen, it'll just fast forward 10 seconds?
No.
And you can just do that a bunch of times?
But I just watched that. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's the only
Where am
part
I
of the
going?
movie that's worth watching. 58
something?
58:20.
Is it official that he's typecasted?
I think he only did the two.
Okay.
They just did them back to back.
There's a girl in the garden. A girl in the garden. She looks so drunk.
So, I mean, that's some pretty
Did they-
good motorboat to
Yeah.
the face. You don't see
Yeah.
that in a lot of movies.
Now, the chick in the garden, is that from Shaun of the Dead or what?
I mean, maybe.
Hold on.
I wonder if they homage that.
There's a girl in the garden.
There's a girl in the garden.
She's so pissed.